The laughter hit the room like broken glass. Sharp. Echoing. Cruel. It came from the man at the head of the long, shining boardroom table, Mr. Langford, a man so rich that even his silence carried weight. He leaned back in his leather chair, polished cufflinks glinting under the fluorescent lights, and grinned. "If this little one can translate for us," he said, pointing at the girl in the corner, "I'll give her mother my job." The room erupted. A few chuckles. One snort. A murmur of agreement, the kind that comes from people too afraid to question power. And that was the moment the air changed. Amara looked up slowly from her notebook, the light catching the edge of her brown eyes. Her mother, Miriam, froze mid-step, a tray of porcelain cups trembling in her hands. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. But her daughter didn't hide. She didn't look away. Her eyes stayed on the man who laughed. Come. Unblinking. Then, in a voice that was steady but soft enough to silence the room, Amara began to speak, in Mandarin. Perfect. Clear. Fluent. Every word rolled out smooth as water, every tone exact. She translated Mr. Zhao's quiet apology for the delay, his polite gratitude for the meeting, his measured expectations for the deal. The sound filled the space where arrogance had been. The room went still. The assistant's pen dropped and rolled under the table. Mr. Zhao's lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across his face. And for the first time that day, the millionaire's confidence cracked. Langford's laughter died in his throat. "Wait," he stammered. "Where did you learn?" But Amara didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just looked him in the eye and said, "My mother taught me never to laugh at people who serve you." The sentence landed like a thunderclap. The air felt heavier. Even the hum of the city outside seemed to fade. For a moment, no one spoke. Mr. Zhao cleared his throat, nodded at the girl, and continued the meeting, now addressing her directly. Amara translated every word with precision, her voice calm, her expression unreadable. Miriam stood by the wall, clutching the tray to her chest, torn between pride and fear. Langford's assistant scribbled notes nervously, his usual smirk gone. The man who used to command every room sat still, his eyes darting between the girl and the client, trying to understand what just happened. He wanted to regain control, but each time he tried to speak, Amara was already there, bridging the silence, translating meaning, connecting worlds he could barely pronounce. Even Zhao's tone began to soften, the kind of respect reserved for equals. That's when Langford realized something was shifting. The power he wore like armor was slipping, word by word, into the voice of a 17-year-old girl. When the meeting ended, Zhao smiled warmly at Amara and said something in Mandarin. She nodded politely, then turned to Langford and translated, "He says he would like to meet again. With your permission, and my help." Langford forced a smile, but inside, his pride screamed. He extended a stiff handshake to Zhao and muttered something about follow-up emails. The Chinese businessman left satisfied. The rest of the room exhaled. But Langford didn't move. He just stared at Amara. As the staff began cleaning up, Miriam approached her daughter quietly. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "We can't afford trouble." Amara closed her notebook and said softly, "We can't afford silence either." Her mother looked at her for a long time, eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed. Langford finally stood. He walked to the window, hands in his pockets, staring at the skyline like it might answer the questions running through his head. He wasn't used to being the one humiliated. He wasn't used to being wrong. Behind him, Amara and her mother gathered their things. Just before they left, he turned and said quietly, "You caught me off guard today." It wasn't an apology. It was confusion. The kind that comes when the world tilts for the first time. Outside, the hallway lights flickered. Amara held her mother's arm as they walked toward the elevator. Miriam kept her head down, but Amara's eyes stayed forward. She could feel people staring, the assistants, the secretaries, even the security guard at the front desk. But she didn't care. For once, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. That night, back in their tiny apartment, Miriam sat at the kitchen table, her uniform still smelling of coffee and bleach. She was quiet, still shaken. But when she looked at her daughter across the table, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Not rebellion, not arrogance, but light. Amara was studying again, flipping through her notebook, whispering Mandarin phrases under her breath. "Why that language?" Miriam asked softly. Amara smiled without looking up. "Because the world listens when you speak it," she said. "And one day, it'll listen to me." Meanwhile, somewhere high above the city, Langford poured himself a drink. The skyline shimmered in his office windows, but the reflection that stared back looked different tonight. Smaller, quieter. He replayed the moment in his mind, the sound of her voice, the look in her eyes. For the first time, the laughter that once made him feel powerful now sounded hollow. The next morning, whispers spread through the office. "Did you hear about the janitor's daughter?" someone said. "She spoke Chinese better than the translator." "No way," another replied. Mr. Langford looked like he'd seen a ghost. By lunchtime, the story had spread to every floor. But no one dared mention it in front of him. Still, when Zhao's assistant called later that day to thank him for the young interpreter, Langford's pride twisted again. He hung up mid-sentence. He didn't like losing control. Especially not to a girl who didn't belong in his world. Or so he thought. That night, he sat alone in the empty boardroom, the same place where he had laughed. The same echo bounced off the walls, but this time, it sounded different. Lonelier. He didn't know it yet, but that laugh, that careless moment of mockery, had just changed everything. Because the next time he saw Amara, it wouldn't be as a janitor's daughter sitting quietly in the corner. It would be as the girl who taught a millionaire the one language money could never buy, respect. The story had only begun. The laughter that started it all was fading, but its echo would follow him long after the meeting ended. And somewhere across town, a young black girl whispered new words under the light of a flickering lamp, preparing for a world that had finally started to listen. And in that small apartment, filled with the hum of traffic and the soft rhythm of dreams too big to fit its walls, the seed of something unshakable had been planted. Dignity met arrogance that day. And for once, dignity didn't blink. Langford slammed the door so hard the glass rattled. The echo of his own anger filled the empty office. He didn't know what bothered him more, that a deal worth millions almost fell apart, or that it had been saved by a janitor's daughter. He threw his gold pen onto the table, muttering under his breath, "A child. A damn child." But beneath the anger was something uglier. Shame. For the first time in years, someone had looked him in the eye and made him feel small. Downstairs, in a cramped service hallway, Miriam walked silently beside her daughter. The uniform she wore clung to her with the smell of disinfectant and sweat. She wanted to say something, to tell Amara to be careful, to not draw attention. But Amara's calmness made her pause. "You don't apologize for being seen, Mama," she said softly. Her words carried a quiet fire, something beyond her years. Miriam didn't reply. She just nodded, though part of her feared what that kind of courage might cost them. That night, the Daniels' apartment buzzed with the noise of the laundromat below. The walls were thin, every sound of the city seeped in. But on the small table by the window, Amara's world was different. Notebooks stacked high, flashcards with Mandarin characters, scribbles of French and Swahili. Her pencils were worn down to nubs. She flipped through a page filled with Chinese idioms, mouthing the tones carefully, her voice steady, determined. "One day," she whispered to herself, "words will open doors." Her mother watched her from the kitchen sink, pride and worry tangled in her chest. Meanwhile, Langford couldn't sleep. His penthouse, usually a haven of order, felt heavy. He sat at his marble bar, scrolling through his emails, replaying the meeting in his mind. The sound of the girl's Mandarin still haunted him. He told himself it didn't matter. "Just a lucky trick," he grumbled, pouring himself another drink. But the image of Zhao's impressed smile wouldn't leave his head. A billionaire, made to look like a fool, by someone who wasn't even supposed to be in the room. The next morning, in his office, he snapped at his assistant. "Don't ever let something like that happen again." The man blinked. "Something like what, sir?" Langford's jaw clenched. "Being outsmarted by charity." His assistant hesitated. "Sir, Zhao asked if the girl could attend the next meeting." Langford froze. "What?" "He said she brought clarity. He wants her there." The words felt like a slap. For a moment, Langford just stared, then forced a thin smile. "Fine. If Zhao wants her, he can have her." Let's see how long the magic lasts. At home, when Miriam told Amara she'd been asked back, the older woman's hands trembled. "You don't owe them anything," she warned. But Amara only smiled. "I know. But maybe they owe us something, respect." The next week, the boardroom looked different. Cameras. Translators. More suits. Langford had gone all out, not for success, but for sabotage. He wanted her to fail. The agenda was filled with technical jargon, acronyms even professionals stumbled over. As Amara walked in, holding her worn notebook, whispers rippled through the room. "That's her," someone murmured. "The janitor's kid." Langford smirked, leaning toward his assistant. "Let's see the prodigy perform." But when the meeting began, something remarkable happened. Amara didn't stumble. She didn't flinch. Each word from Zhao was translated with precision, elegance, and poise. She even paused to explain cultural nuances, helping both sides understand one another better. The investors leaned forward, taking notes. Zhao smiled throughout, visibly impressed. When a complex financial phrase came up, Amara stopped, clarified the concept perfectly, and then continued, seamless. Langford's smirk faded inch by inch. He tried to interrupt her once, asking a sarcastic question in front of everyone, but Zhao cut him off sharply. "Let her finish," he said. The power dynamic in the room shifted. Everyone could feel it. By the end of the meeting, Zhao stood, shook Amara's hand, and said something softly in Mandarin, "You carry wisdom beyond your years." Then, turning to Langford, he added in English, "I would like Miss Daniels to visit Beijing this summer. My company would be honored to host her as an intern." The room erupted in polite applause. Langford forced a smile, but inside, humiliation burned. When everyone left, he waited. Amara and her mother were the last to gather their things. He closed the door behind them and stepped forward, his voice low and sharp. "Don't think this makes you special," he said. "People like you get lucky once." Amara looked at him, calm as ever, and said softly, "Then I guess you'll see me twice." He froze. Her words hit harder than any insult. For the first time, he saw something in her he didn't understand. Not defiance, but faith. She wasn't trying to win. She was simply standing where she belonged. That night, Langford sat alone in his office, lights off, skyline gleaming beyond the glass. His assistant came in quietly. "Sir, the investors are pleased. They said the girl saved the partnership." Langford didn't respond. He just stared out the window. "Saved the partnership," he repeated slowly, "and made me look like the student." Across town, Amara lay awake too. She couldn't sleep. Her mother's words kept echoing, "You don't owe them anything." But she wasn't thinking about them. She was thinking about Zhao's smile, his words, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was finally being seen for her mind, not her background. But even as hope grew, so did tension. Langford's pride was wounded, and pride has a way of striking back. In the days that followed, whispers began, about her qualifications, her background, rumors that she had cheated. She didn't know it yet, but the powerful man she had humbled wasn't done with her. Still, that night, in the soft light of their tiny apartment, Miriam kissed her daughter's forehead and said, "You scared me today." Amara smiled faintly. "I scared him more." Outside, the city lights flickered like restless stars. Inside, two women sat in silence, one still afraid of the world's cruelty, the other quietly preparing to change it. Neither knew that the game had already shifted. The girl who once served tea had now become the one everyone needed. And in the shadows of his corner office, Langford swore he'd find a way to take back control. But deep down, under all that anger, something else had begun to stir. A question he couldn't silence. What if the janitor's daughter isn't the one out of place? What if I am? The battle lines were drawn, between pride and grace, arrogance and dignity. The story wasn't finished. It was only gathering force. The ballroom had quieted long ago, but the memory of that night still hung in the air like smoke. The laughter, the cruelty, the shame. Yet beneath the echoes of humiliation, something inside Amina had awakened. A quiet resolve. She didn't know why she was chosen to attend the gala again. The same company, the same millionaire, the same glittering chandeliers. This time, she came not as an assistant, but as a last-minute translator for a crucial business meeting between Mr. Whitmore and the visiting Chinese investors. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of irony. The morning sun bathed the hotel's marble lobby in pale gold as Amina walked through its tall glass doors, her mother's old pendant resting against her collarbone. It wasn't jewelry, it was a reminder. Of strength, of patience, of faith that dignity, though mocked, never truly breaks. When she entered the conference room, the air was tight with formality. Suits rustled. Laptops clicked. The investors sat on one side, calm, confident, unreadable. On the other sat Mr. Whitmore, still smug, still unbothered. His voice dripped arrogance as he glanced at Amina. "Let's hope this translator knows her place," he muttered. The words were almost identical to what he had said that night. But Amina didn't flinch. She simply smiled, a calm, knowing smile. The kind that hides storms. The meeting began. Numbers, contracts, proposals, a world of corporate jargon unfolded. The Chinese investors listened politely but exchanged wary looks. Mr. Whitmore, eager to impress, attempted to sprinkle in a few Mandarin phrases he had picked up from a translation app. His pronunciation was a disaster. The investors stiffened. A moment of miscommunication spiraled. Whitmore grew impatient, then angry. "What's wrong with them?" he snapped. "Amina, tell them we're offering the best deal they'll ever get." But before she could speak, one of the investors, an elderly man with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. He said something softly in Mandarin. Whitmore frowned. What did he say? Amina hesitated. The silence stretched. All eyes turned to her. Then she spoke, not in English, not timidly, but in perfect, fluent Mandarin. Her voice was steady, clear, commanding. "He said you do not respect them. They feel insulted." The room froze. Every head turned toward Amina, including Mr. Whitmore's. His smirk evaporated. His hand, which had been gripping his pen, loosened. She continued, fluid, eloquent, translating with precision, but also with compassion. Her words bridged the gap his arrogance had built. She rephrased his failed pitch, polished his tone, and restored the investor's dignity without exposing his ignorance outright. The old man nodded slowly, impressed. His fellow delegates began smiling, engaging again, listening. Mr. Whitmore, for once, said nothing. He watched her, the girl he had once humiliated, now holding the entire room together with her grace and intellect. When the investors began laughing politely at one of her translated jokes, something broke in him. Pride. The invisible armor that wealth had forged around his ego began to crack. After the meeting, the investors shook her hand, one by one, thanking her directly in Mandarin. The eldest among them clasped her hands warmly and said, "You remind me of my granddaughter. Intelligent, dignified." Then he turned to Mr. Whitmore and said something that made the room fall silent again. "Without her, we would not sign." The deal, a multimillion-dollar partnership Whitmore had chased for years, now hung on Amina's presence. On the very woman he had once dismissed. Whitmore swallowed hard. His jaw clenched. His eyes flicked toward Amina, not with the old contempt, but with something rawer. Respect. Fear. Shame. As the investors left the room, Amina began to gather her notes. She felt the quiet around her, the silence of power shifting. Then she heard it. His voice. Soft. Strained. "Amina, wait." She turned. "I owe you an apology," he said, forcing the words out like a man swallowing stones. "And my gratitude." She nodded, not with triumph, but with grace. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Whitmore. Just treat the next person better." He blinked, as if the simplicity of her words carried more weight than all his wealth. As she left the room, the door closed quietly behind her, but for him it echoed like judgment. That day, the news of the successful deal spread through the company like wildfire. The headlines credited the firm. But inside every boardroom whisper, one truth repeated. It wasn't the millionaire who saved the deal. It was the girl he once mocked. That night, as Amina walked home beneath the city lights, her mother's words replayed in her heart. Never let their laughter define you. Sometimes, silence is the loudest answer. For the first time, Amina smiled, not because she had won, but because she had stayed kind. And in that quiet victory, the story was no longer about a rich man's arrogance. It was about a young black woman's dignity, a power far greater than money could ever buy. The world outside the Whitmore Corporation moved fast. Markets, deals, mergers, but inside Mr. Whitmore's office, time had stopped. The glass walls reflected a man who no longer recognized himself. The same tailored suit, the same gold watch, the same office that looked over the city skyline, yet everything felt hollow. He had won the contract. He had earned millions. But he couldn't escape the memory of Amina's voice, calm, confident, pure. It replayed in his mind not as a sound, but as a mirror. And what it reflected was not her brilliance, but his blindness. Days turned into weeks. Mr. Whitmore began to notice things he'd never cared about before. The way his employees avoided his gaze, how his secretary's smile faded when he entered, how laughter in the break room died at his footsteps. He had built an empire of fear, not respect. And now, every achievement tasted bitter. At night, he would sit in his penthouse surrounded by luxury, mahogany shelves, crystal chandeliers, rare wines, yet feel a gnawing emptiness that no possession could fill. The same words haunted him over and over. Just treat the next person better. Simple, unadorned. But it felt heavier than all his fortunes combined. One afternoon, as he walked through the company lobby, he overheard two junior employees talking. "Did you hear?" That in turn, Amina, she left for Beijing. Got a scholarship. Full ride. Mandarin Excellence Program. He froze mid-step. Beijing. Scholarship. Full ride. For the first time in years, his lips curved into a real smile. Not one for cameras or clients, but the quiet kind, the kind born from admiration. He thought back to the gala, her humiliation, the laughter, the cruelty he had allowed. His stomach turned. He remembered how proud he felt that night, standing above her like a conqueror. And now, years later, she stood above him, not in power, but in character. He couldn't change the past. But maybe he could change what came after. Weeks later, the company hosted another investor summit. This time, Whitmore himself prepared every detail, but something was different. Gone were the lavish champagne fountains, the cruel jokes, the whispered arrogance. In their place were handwritten notes of gratitude for every employee, from janitors to senior managers. The catering staff were treated as guests, not servants. Every attendee received a small booklet titled, "Respect is the language everyone understands." At the end of the night, he stood before the crowd, his voice quieter, his tone humbler. "Years ago," he began, "I laughed at something I didn't understand. I mocked what was different. And in doing so, I failed not just a person, but the principle of humanity itself." The room went still. He continued, "I once believed wealth was power. But power without empathy is just noise. It took a young woman, a translator, to show me what true fluency means. She spoke not only in Mandarin, but in dignity." He paused, eyes glistening under the lights. "And that, my friends, is the only language worth learning." Applause began softly, then grew. Not polite, genuine. The kind that comes from recognition, not reputation. Later that evening, when the guests had gone, Whitmore walked through the empty hall. He looked up at the portraits of past founders, men who had built empires of profit. He whispered to himself, "I want to build one of respect." He returned to his office, sat down, and opened his laptop. For the first time, his email wasn't about numbers. It was about gratitude. He began to type. "Thank you, dear Amina. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I hope you do. You changed the course of my life, not through anger, but through grace. I used to measure worth in money. Now I measure it in moments like that day, when you spoke truth and never raised your voice. Wherever you are, I hope you continue to speak, to teach, to bridge worlds. The world needs more translators like you, not just of language, but of heart. M. Whitmore." He clicked send. And for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never felt before: peace. In a small classroom in Beijing, Amina stood before a group of children, teaching Mandarin and English. Sunlight streamed through the windows, dust dancing in the golden air. Her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar name. She opened the email, read it once, and smiled. She whispered softly, "He learned." Then she looked up at her students and said, "Now, let's talk about kindness. It's the most powerful word in every language. Power can buy obedience, but only respect can earn loyalty. Mocking another's gift may bring a moment of laughter, but honoring it brings a lifetime of grace." Amina didn't just translate words. She translated hearts, from ignorance to understanding. And in that translation, a millionaire found what all his money had never given him: humanity. In the end, wealth fades, but dignity echoes forever. Because the language of respect, once spoken, never dies.